Hey everybody, it's Ron with Ron's Computer Videos. I want to thank you for taking a few minutes out of your evening and spending it here with us. I've got a very special guest here tonight for a bit of an interview. He is an electrical engineer, and he is the chief engineer of the glue logic for the Macintosh Portable, Mr. Steve Smith. Steve, how are you this evening?
I'm good, Ron. How are you?
I'm doing just fine. I want to thank you in advance for taking time and sharing a little bit of your knowledge about your time with Apple and the different projects you've worked on, not just the Mac Portable, but anything you're interested in speaking to us about tonight. Why don't you give people a little bit of a kind of the 10,000-foot view of your career?
Sure. Well, I went to college at MIT. I got a bachelor's and master's degree in electrical engineering, graduated in early 76. And the electronics industry was kind of at a low point there, but I managed to score a site interview with HP. The big companies come to the college and interview the graduates and all.
Mm-hmm.
I think they said HP had 200 people interview them, and they flew two of us out for a visit. And so I got an interview at the calculator division, and they made me an offer. And so that was my first job out of college. Unfortunately, kind of the moment I walked in the door, they said, "Oh, by the way, we're moving to Oregon." Well, I had just moved from Boston to California. And I didn't want to move to Oregon, which was okay. So my time with the calculator division was short, but it was important because I always tell the story that telephones were expensive in those days. And so engineers at HP shared a phone. Yet two people had the same phone number. So you had a phone mate, office mate. And my phone office mate was Steve Wozniak.
Oh, wow.
So while I was getting my feet wet with whatever they were having me to do there, Woz was sitting at his lab bench building the Apple II. I always say that HP moving to Corvallis, Oregon helped enable the whole situation, because we were all told that you had I forget what it was, 4 months to decide whether you're going to move or not. And if you're not going to move, you could find another job in HP. And Woz knew he didn't want another job in HP, but 4 months of paid time to do whatever he wanted to was a great opportunity for working on the Apple II. So he spent most of his time working on the Apple II, and I don't know what I spent most of my time doing. They threw a few projects my way, but it wasn't anything memorable. So then I bounced around HP. They moved. I bounced around HP a little bit, and then Apple started taking off. So they started hiring everybody they knew from HP and other places. So I went to work for Apple, worked on the original disk drive stuff. Apple wanted to get in the business of building their own disk drives. There was a overall attitude in those days of, well, hell, we built the best personal computer. We can build the best anything. We don't care if there's a whole industry out there of hundreds and thousands of people that have been doing something for decades. We can do it better or cheaper. And so we tried, but we didn't. And, that culminated with Twiggy. If you remember Twiggy from the Lisa days.
Yep.
I worked on that project too, which was not especially successful either. Then moving forward, I was basically a circuit designer. I designed analog circuits, I designed digital circuits, whatever you needed. So worked on a bunch of other things. Some people are aware of the Apple IIc flat panel.
As featured in the movie 2010, the year we made contact.
2010. So let me tell you that story. That's a good story. So Hollywood showed up. I was working. I had left the disk division because I was tired of a lot of things there, and I was working for a one-man show guy who was doing technology research. Let's look at stuff that might be interesting for Apple. And he needed a hardware guy that could put things together for him. He was a software guy, but he was in a management position now. And so between the two of us, we could, make stuff work and show stuff off. And so I built the interface that went between the 2C and the flat panel display. And about the time we were getting kind of near ready to ship, Hollywood came around and said, we want something really, really cool for this movie. What have you got? Mm-hmm. And I go, well, look, I've got the first plastics on the 2C flat panel. And if you look at the movie really carefully, you'll notice it has a blue ribbon cable coming out of the back of the display, plugging into the 2C. Well, bare ribbon cables are not FCC compliant, right. But we didn't have the molded plastic real beige cable yet. Mm-hmm. So they got one that was with a ribbon cable on. So that came from my desk to their hands. And I think I did get it back at some point. But
I think Roy Scheider set it up there on the beach and looked at the visibility on the screen. And right. It wasn't plugged in, but just joking. But looked at the visibility.
So funny. Another funny sidelight of that story. Apple was growing like crazy right now, and office space was really, really tight. And when I went over to work for, his name was Rick Geiger, in this little investigative group, they didn't have a place for me to sit. There was no office for me. So they gave me this little conference room. And we were in something that was called the Triangle Building because it was shaped like a triangle. Yep. And it was all glass walls. And this conference room was in the apex of a glass wall building. So 2 of the 3 walls of my office lab were glass. So you can imagine how bright this room was, right? Yeah. So people would come in to look at the flat plan and go, oh yeah, that looks just fine. Of course, it's like 1,000,000 candle power in there.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And everybody said, oh yeah, I can read it. It's fine, And then of course, when you took it into any place with less than 1,000,000 candle power, you couldn't read the darn thing.
Yeah.
And somehow that got through, but anyway, so there's a chip in that little box that sits on the back of the 2C that I designed.
That's pretty cool.
So the display had a really oddball interface that took quite a bit of, you basically had to capture all the video data and then spit it back out in a completely different format to drive the thing. So
there's actually been a few people in the last few years that have reverse engineered that output and created some basically using FPGAs and things like that to then convert that into something that you can attach a modern display to.
I thought I saw something the other day where they had an HDMI port box that you could, that had an HDMI, which that's cool.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Because it's RGB video. It's a nice, clean.
Yeah, it's one line video is what it is. It's got a vertical sync, a horizontal sync. And I would love to talk to those people and ask them how they solved the 80 column, 40 column problem.
I will, after we're done with the interview, I will absolutely make connections for you, sir.
Because the data on the video line, the first bit of data starts at a different place, whether you're in 80 columns or 40 columns. And the only way to tell is the relative timing between vertical sync and horizontal sync. And that all sounds pretty straightforward until you find out, which I did too late, that there's a mixed 40 column, 80 column mode in an Apple II. And it's pretty much impossible to deal with. So for regular video, I can see it, but for, a flat panel video, it's a different problem. Oh, yeah. So anyway, worked on that, bounced around through a few random things and then ended up in the Mac Portable group. I was kind of like senior engineer in that group, did a lot of the battery management stuff, all the power management stuff, the glue logic, and, kind of pretended to have a little bit of responsibility for what the other guys were doing, but no authority, just responsibility. So did that, and then pretty much worked on every desktop. I was really involved with disk drives, so I did. Woz had done this thing called the Woz machine in original Apple II that interfaced to the disk drives, but it required a lot of CPU intervention. There's a lot of hand holding to make it work.
But it saves you a lot of money because you're not putting expensive chips and stuff in your drives.
Right.
Just hand it off to the CPU.
Exactly. So I ended up designing a chip, actually 2 chips, they were sequential, that performed all that interface and made a much higher level interface to the main system. So the first chip just basically had, go get me this data. Here's the data. And then the second chip actually extended that to DMAing the data directly into memory. And so all you had to do is say, go get me sector number 3 on track 2, and it would come back. And there it is, it's in your memory. So those were a couple of ASICs I did along the way. And then
it's all amazing stuff, because that's really what made it to where, like, Apple users, where, Europe and other platforms and stuff, like Commodore and all that, were largely kind of tape drives and things like that, especially, like I was saying, in Europe. And, the Apple II, it was like very unusual, unless you had like a 2 Plus or something, to not have, floppy drives and things like that.
Right. And then, of course, at some point, the amount of data that floppies would store just wasn't enough anymore. And they became obsolete eventually. And then I worked on various desktop projects in the later years. This was like in the early 90s. Pretty much every desktop machine had some sort of graphics interface that I designed, and the floppy interface chips, if they were still putting floppies in them. They eventually went away, but so I had a bunch of other circuitry and stuff that were so if you bought something from Apple in the late 80s or 90s, it had my stuff in it, probably. some bits and pieces.
Well, that's my favorite era. So
yeah. No, it was really easy in some ways, because we were just following the roadmap, right? 68,000, 68020, 68030, 68040. Just build another desktop with the next Motorola generation processor and whatever it takes to make it work, right? So it didn't take a lot of creativity to know what to do next. You just build the next faster thing with the next faster chip. Unfortunately, the Motorola wagon ran out of gas, and we had to make the jump to Intel. And that was right about when, I'm trying to think, have we been doing much Intel stuff before? I left in 96. So I guess, we had made the jump. There was Power PCs, and then make the jump to Intel stuff. But it wasn't a great time. Apple wasn't doing that well. Margins kept coming down. There's more and more competition. The killer apps weren't coming around to get people to buy more stuff. It wasn't until iPods came out and everybody went, wow, I really want an iPod. Oh, it really only interfaces good with a Mac? Well, then I'll buy a Mac. And here we go, off to the races again. And then phones. And so, but the desktop world was dying, right? Not really doing well at all. So after 17 years at that point, I left for another startup, and went off and did Gigabit Ethernet switching. Just one more thing to learn.
Yeah.
It's all gates, right?
Eventually, yep. It's gates all the way down.
We're for a startup called Extreme Networks, which nobody's ever heard of anymore, but they're still in business. There was a collection of startups, when Ethernet was taking off, the big Ethernet players at the time, Cisco, 3Com, I could think of some more, but not right now, we're basically selling 10-year-old technology for tens of thousands of dollars a box. Mm-hmm. This is 100 megabit Ethernet, right? The boxes were like $30,000 to $50,000, and they were doing it with FPGAs, and they were doing it with processors processing the data streams. And when Gigabit was on the horizon, they kind of went, you can't do gigabit speeds this way anymore. We need to find people that know how to do high performance, low cost, big volume stuff. Where could we find them? Oh, how about all these PC guys that are sitting around in a dying world? And we'll go get some of them. And so a lot of my friends all went to work for gigabit Ethernet startups who mostly all got bought out by the big companies. We didn't get bought out. We went public and then crashed, but went way up first and then crashed. So, because it was crazy times, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, so that's kind of it in a nutshell. And then I retired and left California, went to Colorado and became a ski bum.
I think that's everybody's dream at some point, right?
It was mine. I loved to ski. I skied, all the time in California. I skied, and so I lived it. I told my friends I wanted to join the 100-100 club, and they said, "What's that?" I said, 100 rounds of golf and 100 days of skiing a year, and I did it for many years. So I missed tech. I missed the people. You don't run into Silicon Valley people just everywhere. More so now than you used to, but it was very concentrated in those days. But it was an interesting time. So that's my little bit of history. Where do you want to go?
Well, I thought we would, like all great stories, they start at the beginning.
Sure.
So before you retired, before you ended up spending a lot of time in Vale, Edwards.
No, I hate Vale.
Oh, it's okay. I can't afford to go there, so it's fine.
Okay.
But you with your early education and stuff, you didn't start out doing ASIC design and things like that. What did you actually go to college to learn?
I wanted to design stuff. I tore televisions and stereos apart and said, I want to understand how this stuff works. Because it's 1968. What in your house do you not understand? You can understand a car. Cars are pretty simple.
Yeah, it's a mechanical.
A lawnmower, a washing machine, a refrigerator. But the things that are in front of you that you probably have no idea how they work are TVs and radios, right? And stuff like that. And my dad was an electronic technician. He had been a radio repairman when he was young. And he ended up working for the FAA, maintaining electronic equipment at the airport. And he eventually became boss of the whole organization that maintained electronic equipment at Norfolk Airport. And so I'd been around electronics for a long time. And actually went to college thinking I wanted to be a chemist, because chemistry was the first thing in high school that seemed real. Math. I can do math, but it's not very interesting. But chemistry was real. You put stuff together and you made stuff. This is cool. And I actually told them at MIT that I want to be a chemistry major. And I took Organic 1 and Organic. Well, everybody has to take Organic 1 and Organic 2. And I went, this is just boring. First off, there's no hands-on, and it's just memorization. This isn't interesting. And I switched back to EE. And I said, okay. And I just want to design stuff. I just want to know about circuits. And at MIT in those days was really it wasn't about computers. It was about radio and radar and, RF and communications theory and modulations and how all that stuff works. So I got this classical double E education in that kind of stuff. And then I got a course in control systems, feedback theory and stuff, which most people are completely unaware of. But control systems are an incredible union of very advanced mathematics and hands-on making stuff that works, right? Like the little toy you buy at Sharper Image that suspends the metal ball by a magnet and it floats in space.
Yes.
That's an incredibly complex mathematical problem to build the thing that does that. And so I took this one course in control systems, like, wow, this is amazing. I love this stuff. This is so cool. I did my master's thesis in control systems stuff. And I ran out of analog courses, design courses to take. And so I started taking all the digital design courses. Now, in those days, digital design was like, brand new. And so there really wasn't very much, but there are 2 or 3 courses that I took about digital hardware design. And so when I went off to work, it was just like, well, what do you want to do? I just want to design circuits. Well, we design more digital than analog. Okay, fine, whatever. I can do either. I mean, I remember reading somebody showed me a review that somebody wrote about my job interview at HP. And he held up 2 pieces of paper and he said, you talked to this guy in the morning. He said, this guy really knows a lot about analog design, but I'm not sure he knows anything about digital. And the guy in the afternoon goes, this guy really knows a lot about digital design, but we're not sure he knows anything about analog. So I was ready to do whatever. And I just wanted to build stuff. I built stereo equipment for fun.
Mm-hmm.
I had a fancy, everybody was into big stereos in those days. And I built stereo equipment for fun. I fixed everything that broke. If your TV broke, I fixed it, So I went to Apple just looking for things to design, whatever you put in front of me.
That next challenge, yeah.
The next challenge. And the beauty was with Apple, it was always different, right? Because the whole thing was evolving so fast. The most boring thing in the world to me would be like, okay, you designed a glue chip for this product, go design the glue chip for this product, and then go design the glue chip and just do the same thing over and over again. I was doing something different every time. I was just like the free agent that you could plug into any slot. And so we might as well keep him around. And they kept me around for a long time. They eventually got rid of me, but they kept me around for a long time. Eventually you run into the wrong guy, right? And you got to go. But they kept me around for a long time. So that was what it was about. I wasn't out to change the world or reinvent everything, or, I didn't really buy the Steve Jobs hype thing. And I was always in the other group, right? Mm-hmm. Steve used to say, well, we have the A players and the C players. Mm-hmm. And you Apple II guys over here, you're the C players. I mean, it was.
It's not the future. It's not the future of wherever he wanted to end up being. But for so many years, the bread and butter of Apple
was the Apple II.
I mean, yeah, I was going to say how long that was sold to education. I graduated high school in the mid 1990s.
Okay.
And they were still purchasing old stock Apple IIs and putting them in computer labs because it was cheap to operate. They already owned the software and you could buy 3 Apple IIcs for the price of like a Mac Classic.
And you could sit down and do things with them right away, easily, right? Yeah. So I always thought, the Apple II was not the first desktop personal computer. There were lots of there were, Altairs and IMSAs or whatever it was called and Commodores and everything. But the Apple II was the first one you could sit down and program really easily, right? that was what made the difference. It wasn't the hardware. It was the operating system and the way you could just write lines of basic code and do stuff easily and open the world up to desktop programming. It was the programmer's hobby computer, not the hardware guy's hobby computer.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to toggle in lines of code and hit enter deposit and all that and watch the lights flash. Nobody wants to do that.
Some people want to get out there with tape and spend 20 minutes loading that program.
Paper tape.
That's fine.
Yeah. Yep. But the market for people that want to do that is small. And the market for what those people create is zero.
Right.
Whereas the market for people that want to program is larger, and the market for people that want to buy what they programmed is infinitely larger, right? Because that's where it happens, right? Oh, I can do something that's fun, and I can sell it.
Plus, the Commodore and the Altair and those machines, they didn't have an MECC. They didn't have that education connection. They had some inroads in education, but gosh, they didn't have people releasing nearly free software for schools. And so when Johnny and Janie went to school and used the machine, that's what they came home.
Right.
And when parents went to, PTA night, those are the machines they saw. Those are the machines they bought. And
they were expensive too. I mean, it was funny. I used to live outside of Colorado Springs, and there was an Apple store in Colorado Springs, and I walked into it one day, and they had it. This was probably about early 2000s, and they had a glass display case, and in the display case, they had an Apple II, and they had an original Mac, and they had a Lisa, and a few other things, and they had prices on them. And for some reason, the first thing that crossed my mind was that these were like collector's prices. Because Elisa said $10,000. And they go, wow, are people, and I asked the guy, so are people really paying $10,000 for Elisas now? That seems like crazy. He goes, oh no, those were the original MSRPs. Like $10,000 in like 1980?
Yeah.
That's car money. Right? You can buy a decent car for $10,000 in 1980. So,
but just think with that Lisa though, that $10,000, you could do all 10 things you could do on a Lisa.
Yeah, exactly.
It's more than 10, but it's still under 12. So.
Okay, right. But you were there in the future, right? So anyway. I mean, that was my thing. My thing was just I like building stuff. And,
Well,
and
you
it was
a lot of really good opportunities to.
It was. I mean, it was and it wasn't, right? I mean, I look back on it and say, like, what I didn't get. A young engineer coming out of college is really not complete, right? All college does is show you what it's about, give you a little knowledge, and kind of filter out the people that can't go down this road. There was no mentoring to speak of. I mean, I was really lucky. One time I got a great mentor opportunity when I learned how to build ASICs from a guy who was 20 years older than me and been doing it for years and years and years. But in general, it was sink or swim, go figure it out. Look at the original Macintosh. Burl Smith. Burl Smith designed the original Mac logic board, right? He was like a technician level guy.
Yeah.
And kind of basically what he did was he took the Apple II schematic and he studied it and he went, well, if I plugged a 68,000 in and made the data bus twice as wide and maybe extended the address range and did a few things differently and maybe pull the video out differently and stuff, then yeah, we got a computer with a 68,000. And so it was sink or swim. And nobody told Burl, this is how you need to design this. He just went off and, took and tore into it until he got there.
Andy Herzog has a really great website that's called folklore.org, which I know that the viewers tonight are just like, they're like, "Ugh," you know, when you talk about it, because it's got so many great stories from the old
Right,
days.
right.
And absolutely, there's some great stories on there about how he started out, like Burl started out as a like just technician, like
Right.
just troubleshooting Apple II boards that came back in, and
Yeah.
just made himself invaluable in the company, and so
Right.
got drug along for all of these cool
Right.
projects over the years.
And that was the way it was. Nobody took Burl under their wing. He just did it, right? I mean, when a company's growing that fast, there's plenty of opportunities around. Just grab something. Nobody's going to fight you for it, right?
Yeah.
They're happy to have somebody doing it.
Yes.
But you know, we had hard times too, and things weren't always done necessarily the way you would agree with you know, directions we took and stuff like that. But you know, it wasn't my job to manage the company or make those decisions.
Yeah. That seems to be the story of a lot of people kind of in those early days of just where it was just very chaotic. And you might come in one day and your desk has been moved because somebody needed some space, or sorry, you're now in Texaco Towers this week.
Right.
You got to move out, you know?
Yep. Oh yeah. We moved all the time. I mean, you know, I probably worked in the first 10 years, well, not even 10 years. In the first 5 years I was there, I probably worked in 6 or 7 different buildings, because we were the disk division to start with. And the disk division was not the tail of the dog, but the flea on the tail of the dog, right? I mean, we were the lowest of the low. I mean, I spent a year and a half in a warehouse with no windows.
Oh, wow.
In the center of a warehouse with no windows, and a cluster of 4 or 5 engineers sitting at desks. And, you know, meanwhile, the Mac group had, you know, masseuses, and coolers full of juice and stuff, because they were so much more important than you were. And we never let you forget that.
It's so unfortunate, because the Apple II, that's again where I got my start. It's where a lot of people got their start that are in the hobby these days. That those machines like kept Apple afloat for so long, and helped them weather the storm of things like the Apple III and other, like, you know, projects that were taken on that didn't actually like come to market. And
right. I mean, we sold 2Cs like crazy, and the 2GS was a great machine that was thrown away, basically.
Well, it was stepping on the Mac's toes. It was color, and it had a lot of RAM and a lot of expandability. And
I think it was the 2GS 16-bit? Or was it still? I think it was, right?
Yeah. Because it has the WDC chip. It's basically like the 16-bit version of the.
It's a 16-bit 6502, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was a modern computer, and and there was even a graphical based operating system.
It's GSOS, and it had an Insonic sound chip, and it's an awesome machine. I will tell you what, my parents, my aunt and uncle had a 2GS. They bought it fully kitted out. They didn't really do much with it.
Sure.
And so some time passed, and my parents bought it from them. And in high school and in like, you know, early college and stuff, that machine was still great. I was still going to user group meetings. You could still buy expansion stuff for them. There were still like monthly disc magazines. Even after Apple turned their back on it, that machine just kept going.
Sure.
Because just absolutely captured people's imagination.
Yeah.
And then you had some of those later prototypes like the Mark Twain, where it was like, okay, now we've got integrated floppy drives, and we've got like even more RAM built in, and we've got SCSI built in, and just trying to leverage it even more, and to be more like the ultimate machine. I absolutely understand why management was totally against that. We've got this other black and white machine that we want to sell. You can't keep making amazing stuff in the Apple II division.
Well, management as a euphemism for Steve Jobs.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right, because that
the reality distortion field guy.
The reality distortion field guy, the guy who, he had his world and it was going to live or die. Everything was going to live or die on that. And the rest of us were just there because we couldn't afford to get rid of you right now.
Yeah.
No money. But anyway, that, water under that bridge.
Well, you talked about your time at HP and at the calculator division, even as brief as it was, but it sounds like you made a very important connection in the industry while you were there.
Well, remember I said I shared a phone with Woz? Well, you know who called Woz 8 times a day?
Who?
Steve.
Yeah.
Hi. Oh, can I speak to Steve? Which one? I did make a very important connection there. And a lot of the other engineers from that group ended up at Apple as well. I always used to say that was so there was another groundbreaking thing in those days. And it was the concept that an ordinary rank and file engineer could become relatively wealthy off their job. That never happened before, right? I mean, Hewlett-Packard made lots of money, but it was their company, right? But at Apple, people who were nobodies made lots of money. I knew people that were retiring at 27 who just happened to be in the right place at the right time. And that's commonplace in Silicon Valley going forward. In fact, almost expected. Everybody, it seems as though the whole startup IPO thing has gone quiet recently. I don't know if it's because all the tech that's interesting takes so much money that it's all focused in the big companies or what, but.
Well, I think that again, I'm not an expert on this, but just from what I've seen since the early 2000s especially, there's been a real consolidation of companies and technology, and there seems to be like a shift away from certain types of innovation and over to services, where how do we basically just sort of like make it to where, you can only release an iPod once a generation. You can only release an iPhone once a generation. So once you saturate your market on something like that, what's the next thing? And it's seemingly services. So so now we've got this thing with, LLM and AI to try to chip away at some of these legacy services in a disruptive way. And so it seems like a lot of the focus now is on how do we build up infrastructure to, I guess, make it where it only costs 5 gallons of water to make yourself look like a computer character or a cartoon character instead of 10. So
and I guess
computing and
the hardware world lent itself to small groups, startup funding, bring out a new product, go public, grow like crazy, get bought out, whatever. And there was definitely an industry too, the investment, the IPO industry. By the time I left Apple, the playbook was clear, right? You find some new technology, you find a startup that's being funded by one of the big name venture capital people with the big name investment banking people. So like I went to Extreme Networks. Extreme was Kleiner Perkins and Morgan Stanley. These things don't fail. Right. I mean, anyone can fail, but the deck is stacked in your favor, right? And
that's why I'm desperate to get Berkshire Hathaway to make a small initial investment in my ice cream cart that I'm going to start with the heat wave.
Okay.
I just feel like I feel like it's a sure thing,
It's a
and
sure
that we can't fail. There's enough
right.
money behind it at that point. That
Exactly. And, you know, to I don't know if you followed, you probably weren't paying any attention in the 80s in Japan. The history of tech in Japan in the 80s, everybody was worried, you know, Japan's going to rule the world.
yes,
They were going to run everything. And they had this system, I believe it's called a karetsu. It's the idea that companies partner with other companies. It's like a family.
mm-hmm.
So we have our family, and then there's another family over here and another family over here. And so if I make bricks and I need mortar, well, I buy mortar from the mortar company that's in my family, you know, and we all work together. Well, that concept was being brought to Silicon Valley. So this was 25, 30 years ago, but doing integrated circuits, doing ASICs, custom integrated circuits, is a bit of a challenge because there's only a handful of companies in the world at that time that could build them for you, right? And these people had to be careful because they can't charge you up front enough money to cover their development costs. So let's say you want to build a chip and you say, well, I want to build a chip and I'm going to buy 10,000 units a month for the next 5 years. And they'll go, oh, okay, great. We'll sell you that chip for $10 a piece, and we need $400,000 up front to do that. They then go off and spend $2 million supporting and developing for that chip. Okay, now if you're a startup company, you can't go in there and say, I'm going to sell 10,000 units a month, right? And so no one will talk. All the people that, when I was at Apple, I could pick up the phone and call any of these ASIC fab companies mm-hmm. and have someone in my office in an hour. Oh, I want to talk about a new project. Oh, hello. There you are. Yeah, because I'm from Apple, right? Well, as soon as I went to startup, I call them and they go, oh, yeah, sorry, click, sorry, click, sorry, click. And then finally, our little investment group had one of those companies in the group and was told, you will do business with these guys, even though it doesn't make economic sense. You'll do business. So there are some challenges there as well. But still, they tried to make it as much of a sure thing as they could. Mm-hmm. And then the investment bankers take over and they make their pound of flesh as well. And it goes on from there. And it's all exciting times. But yeah, the whole point of it is the concept that average, ordinary, rank and file people, mm-hmm. Apple made millionaires out of secretaries in the early days. Or whatever. I think we called them secretaries then. I don't know what the appropriate term is today.
Admin.
Yeah.
Something,
whatever.
Mm-hmm. Administrative.
I'm not very PC. Sorry.
Well, you worked for Apple. I can understand.
I don't know. I certainly couldn't get a job there today. I wouldn't fit in now, I'm sure. But I probably couldn't get an education at MIT today either. So none of those things would be available to me. So anyway, it was an exciting, wild time.
Absolutely. You brought up earlier, you were talking about working at the Floppy division and kind of how it was like that you were not the tail of the dog, but you were definitely back there by the haunches.
Right.
But with the ASIC design and things like that. So working with the Floppy division, because I know that there's a lot of people, especially since the with the Disk 2 system and with Woz's hackery to basically just try to make it as cheap as possible, and the pressures that other folks were underneath, especially like the Twiggy project and things like that, and how that was going to be the future for like the Lisa and the Mac was going to use that. What stories do you have kind of about working at the floppy division and kind of like as you started out and then with moving into Twiggy and some of those later projects?
Okay, well, there was some crazy engineering going on in there, and this is going to sound really insane. So why did Apple have a floppy division to start with? Well, there was a guy. So the original Apple II's power supply was designed by a senior engineer. I don't know if he was working as a consultant or at another company. I don't really know his background. His name was Rod Holt. And I believe Rod has passed since then. He wasn't especially healthy in those days. So, but of course, when one of your designs puts a 2025 equivalent $500 million in your pocket, you tend to think you're a god, right? I can understand that. And so Rod had all these crazy ideas in a blank slate of like, go out and do stuff, do more stuff, right? What else can you do? Mm-hmm. And so he said, well, we can build a better disk drive. Okay, well, Seagate was in business in those days building us disk drives. That's who we were buying them from. The original floppy drives were Seagate drives. And eventually we started buying them from Alps in Japan. But Rod looked at the design of the drive and he said, I can do better than this. I can make this better and I can make this cheaper. Well, better turned into, if you think about magnetic media, the speed the media moves past the head is everything, right? Mm-hmm. Because you can only change magnetic domains on the media so close together.
Right.
So, but if the disk is spinning at a constant speed and you're on the inside track, the media is moving slower than on the outside track. So you have to, the worst case is the inside track where it's moving slowly. And so on the outside track, you could actually write more data than you can on the inside track, but you'd have to change the speed of the motor. So Rod said, well, let's do that. So we built a variable motor speed system. So there was more data written on the outer track than on the inner track. And there were actually like multiple zones of, I forget how many speed zones there were, but well, once we did that, so, oh great, our floppies hold more data than standard floppies, mm-hmm. but they're not compatible, right? Can't read an IBM floppy, original IBM floppy, on an Apple II. And then Rod also came up with this thing of like, oh wow, the spindle motor is driven by a little DC motor with a belt and everything. Like, why don't we do it with a stepper motor instead? Mm-hmm. And so we'll put a stepper motor in there. Of course, stepper motors are great at certain things, but smooth continuous motion isn't one of them. And so there are a lot of design challenges there. And we were doing crazy stuff. And then he got into the Twiggy design and he said, I forget, the actuator to move the head back and forth again was a standard motor with a belt drive system. And Rod had found a motor system out of a General Motors carburetor. It was a little motor with a rod that a geared rod, threaded rod, a coarsely threaded rod, and as you ran the motor, you focus here, it ran in and out, right? And it only cost like $5. So we had a couple of mechanical engineers on the project, and so they were tasked with making this $5 carburetor motor run the head because it was cheaper. And I was tasked with making the stepper motor do the variable speeds and run smoothly as possible and all that stuff. So again, we were doing all this stuff because we were going to make the existing industry standard 5% better here and 10% better here and 10% cheaper here. But the problem is you're doing that with a team of like 6 people.
Mm-hmm.
The industry has how many hundred people working on making things better and cheaper?
Right.
So even if you do it once, they'll just pass you and pass you again and pass you again and pass you again. And so eventually, by the time John Sculley came to Apple, it was like, why are we not compatible? And he came to my office one day and said, why are our floppies not compatible? And I explained all the, variable speed stuff. And he was like, is it really worth it? Doesn't seem like it, does it? Okay. And he kind of drew a line in the sand. From now on, we're just going to buy what everybody else buys. It makes more sense. I need to turn some lights on here. I'm losing focus.
Yeah, that's good.
Mm-hmm. There was a lot of crazy, goofy stuff. It's funny. One of Rod's great ideas was to put a flywheel on the disk drive.
Mm-hmm.
And the center of the flywheel would have a bearing in it. And the bearing would only be loosely, so the inside of the bearing would be coupled to the shaft. The outside of the bearing is coupled to the flywheel, and the bearing would be filled with like this really thick silicon grease that would damp all the jittery motion generated by the stepper motor. Of course, no one ever asked, like, how is it this grease is going to stay in place for 5 or 10 years or something?
Right.
I still have a tube of General Electric. Grease is not oil, and you can buy really thick silicon oil, and you can buy silicon grease. And I have a tube of that silicon grease that we use to play with that stuff. It comes in handy in the garage. It lasts a lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
And I always said to myself, I'm keeping this as a reminder that when your boss asks you to do something that's really, really stupid, he may actually just be asking you to do something that's really, really stupid. Even if he is your boss, and even if he just banked, $50 million from a stock deal. There were some wild things. One of my friends was a mechanical engineer, got fired because he just didn't go along with the program, and cost himself several $1 million.
Wow.
In stock options.
Yeah.
So every once in a while, something weird would happen like that. Fortunately, a lot of people in those days found themselves working on projects that would get canceled.
Yeah.
I always said, none of my projects ever get canceled, but some of them should have been. So Twiggy, the 2C flat panel, things like that. Sometimes maybe we should have canceled these things, but we didn't.
Well, but I think that it's one of those things, because there's lots of stuff even today that you see teased, you see stuff, people do tech demos all the time. Yeah. And it's mostly just to either like internally put pressure on teams to like just innovate and let's see what that next thing is going to be. And in those days, Apple, there was no shortage of, we're just trying everything. We're going to see where the future's at.
I can appreciate that view from the outside. I will say it never felt that way from the inside. From the inside, it was, you make this work or the whole company's going to die and we're all blaming you.
Oh, God. No pressure. No pressure.
Yeah, but no pressure. Sorry. Because, we were really thin. I never understood the concept of the thing you're doing has to work perfectly right away or it's the end of the world. But no, we're not going to bring a second engineer on to help you out or look over your shoulder and, find mistakes or help, QC things or whatever. But it is really, really important.
Well, and that's a lot of the story that you hear from folks, just what a trial by fire and stressful sort of experience that it was. Yeah. You made amazing things that absolutely changed the face of computing.
There's no doubt.
but it was just like 120-hour weeks and sleeping under your desk and just like being on the verge of a heart attack the whole time. I mean, if you could put up with that, then absolutely. It was great.
I mean, by the time, most of my career at Apple, I didn't work 40-hour weeks, but I never really worked 80, 90-hour weeks. It was never quite like that. But and there's only so much. I always say, you're probably only productive for 40 hours a week anyway. The rest of the time's just for show. And I never really had to do too much of that. I mean, I worked some long hours on occasion when you need to, but crunch times. But usually, ASICs come first. Mm-hmm. So hardware doesn't exist. ASICs take a long time. Okay, 9 months to a year. So you got to start them first. And hardware doesn't exist until you have the ASICs, because you can't fake what the ASIC does.
Right.
It has to be fast and compact, and you can't build a breadboard. I mean, when I first started working at HP and stuff, you built a giant breadboard with maybe, 200 DIP packages on it, all wire wrapped together, and that became the ASIC. And so you could debug but even by my Apple times, you couldn't do that anymore, right? The DIP packages, they don't go fast enough. There's too many of them. There's too many things, right? And so the ASICs have to come first. And so you start early, and it takes a long time, and the crunch isn't there because everyone else on the projects is sort of in cruise mode while you're in get stuff done mode. Mm-hmm. And then when your stuff is done, they take off running like hell to ship out the door, and you're no longer in crunch mode anymore. So you're a little bit out of sync with the world. When the world is crunching, you're like chilling and go, let me know if there's any problems. I'll help you look at that. Or let's see if we can figure out what's going wrong. I don't think it's me. That kind of thing. So it's much less crunchy in the ASIC world.
That's good.
Yeah. I mean, when I went to the startup, that was, 7 days a week, 10, 12 hours a day kind of stuff. But that's just startup life. You do it for a couple of years, you get a big reward. It was worth it. No complaints. But Apple wasn't quite that way just because of what I did. But yeah, it was. Everybody was in the sink or swim world, and don't look for your management to, help you out. Right? They don't know what you're doing. I am trying to remember if I ever worked for anyone that had any expertise at all in what I was doing, and it was probably once or twice, a few times, but for the most part, especially the early days, no. Later on, yeah, but for the most part, no.
Yeah. I'm sure there's a point where you have to. It always seems like management they've got like the overall idea of what's happening. It's just more about like orchestrating other people's talents, and then as a company like Apple grew, right. You just attracted people that and either you had those promotions from within, or you poached somebody from outside that you were trying to like do some kind of specific thing. So I could see how things would later on, there would maybe be slightly less pressure because you could at least go to your boss and discuss the project, right. And not just like timelines, like actual like technical details,
technical issues and stuff like that, right? So I was going to tell you about, here's another interesting story, right? So certainly the Mac Portable would not be considered a huge success. Right?
I own 2 of them.
Cool, you're one up on me.
I have a backlit and a original non-backlit. I never
had a backlit.
Don't hold it against me, but I also own the Sony model.
The
PowerBook 100.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
I have. So back in those days, the team members of the core team always got a prototype. You know, before you go into production, you build a bunch of prototypes and stuff, and so we all got prototypes. It's kind of one of the rewards you got. You know, they'd have 10 or 15 prototypes that they'd hand out to the various team members. And I don't know how much plastic molding experience you've ever had. Probably not much, because not many people have. Yeah. But one of the things you do in the plastic molding, so you learn all this various stuff, building this stuff. When you're, in the plastic molding world, they'll shoot the product with clear plastic.
Yes.
And the idea is that you can see how the plastic flows in the mold by looking at the stress lines and stuff in the clear plastic. So the clear plastic reveals a lot to the mold, the designers. These guys are incredible engineers in their own right. The people that design the molds that make complicated plastic devices are, you know, they're up there, right? And so we got Mac portables with clear cases.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, which is, everybody likes them because they're cool.
Oh yeah.
They're not glass filled, so they're not nearly as strong, so they break easily, but who cares? They're clear, right? So I had one of those, and several years later, long since past there, I was watching eBay, and somebody on eBay was selling a clear Mac portable prototype. Mm-hmm. And it was beat up. It didn't work. It had stickers all over it. And somebody in Japan paid $7,000 for it in like $1992 or something. And in those days, you could talk back and forth to people on eBay. Mm-hmm. So I sent a message to the guy who was the second high bidder and said, I have one of these that's perfect. Mm-hmm. And would you be interested? And he sent me thousands of dollars in postal money orders. And mine went to Japan because $7,000 was a lot of money then.
Oh, yeah.
And so I didn't have one for a long time. And then one day in Colorado Springs, I was looking in Colorado Springs, I looked at Craigslist and somebody had a Mac portable for sale for $40.
Yeah.
And so I went and bought it, and it was this two older hippie type couple. Mm-hmm. And they thought God had walked into their little apartment. Can we take your picture? So, they were doing selfies and all that. I was like, oh my God, So I do have one. I never tried to turn it on. I doubt it works. Probably certainly doesn't work now. But
well, Steve, if you decide that you want to restore them, there's a guy that's in the hobby these days. He goes by the Tech Knight. His name's Mike. He's a real nice guy. He's done some really exhaustive videos and stuff on restoring those machines, and he also does a service. So any connections I can make, I'm happy to make those for you.
So you can make them work again. I'm just impressed that anybody makes them work again.
Well, it's again, we kind of talked in the pre-interview a little bit about the hybrid module and some of the things that kind of cause you problems on those. But what's nice is that there's another gentleman. His name's Androta, or goes by Androta online, that made a modern reproduction of the hybrid module. So the non-backlit models are very easy to very easy to restore these days. Screens typically seem to be kind of the weak part, and all of those old LCDs didn't really hang in there too well. But
it's a pretty standard screen, right? It's
I think they're made by Sharp. And
I was going to say, I think it's a Sharp. We got a lot of stuff from Sharp in those days, so it probably was a Sharp.
And I think Apple ended up, the big problem is it's a monochrome active matrix display and non-backlit. So there's a couple things working against you. And I think that there are one or two compatible Sharp parts out there. But what people are doing, just because they're, it's new old stock 40-year-old LCDs. I think what people are doing is they're just accepting that entropy is part of our universe,
Right.
and they're just like, it's got a couple deadlines. It's fine.
It's fine. Yeah, don't worry
It's
about
good
it.
enough.
Right.
Especially those the Actor Matrix backlit display. Those are unobtainium at this point.
Right. Right.
So mine has a
Well, I
white
don't even
line and a black
remember.
line.
I don't even remember the backlight. I mean, the project was over and I was off somewhere else when they started selling the backlight ones, because there wasn't really an engineering change, right? I mean, you just
The system board is different.
well, you have to obviously you have
the
to
hybrid module. The RAM that it'll accept is different because the original versions are like PS RAM to kind of save battery power and all.
Yeah, obviously you have to power the backlight and do some other things.
Yeah.
But I don't think the video interface part was different. But yeah, I was off on another project by then, and I don't even remember who handled that or what the deal was with that. I never had one or saw one. It's funny. What do we keep for? You've got a whole wall of collectors.
I got all kinds of junk.
I tried not to be a hoarder.
Mm-hmm. It's not hoarding if your stuff is cool.
If it's cool.
If your stuff is sucky, then yeah, it's hoarding. It's like nobody wants your warped Tupperware lids, but everybody wants a Platinum Mac Plus.
Okay. All I have is the Mac Portable.
Mm-hmm.
I have some random I have a couple laptops that were like real laptops, but I didn't even work on them. I got them. There was a lot of horse trading that went on, and I got them from a horse trade somehow. None of the desktop machines I have, they all got given away or whatever. I have a 2C flat panel display, serial number 1.
Wow,
that's
awesome.
Premier collector's item.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I have a Newton, but Newtons don't seem to be collectible.
I think they're getting there. Especially
because we couldn't have sold that many of them. There we go. Let's stay in focus here. We couldn't have sold that many of them, but
I mean, it was enough were sold to justify like the original model, the 100, the 110. There's a 130. Then it's like the 2000, the 2100. It went through a bunch of iterations with that, and then the eMate 300, so like the laptop style one that went to education. And I think that a lot of Newton users were kids that had an eMate 300 maybe in school. Now, granted, that was not like a wide release thing, but there are enough people out there that remember that to look back on it fondly. And all the people that came out of that Newton division that went to like General Magic, or people, it was the Palm. Or like US Robotics, Palm, and then Palm, and all, as all these.
Because it was all a software problem, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the hardware part was really nothing. I mean, it wasn't nothing, but it was the easy part. It was the software that was the hard part.
Right.
And so, and once they canceled the Newton, those people really didn't have a home at Apple anymore.
Yeah.
So they had to go somewhere else.
Yeah.
People were coming and going a lot by that point.
Yeah. I think at that time, and then there was a lot of weird decisions. I wasn't there. I wasn't under the pressures that different people, the decision makers, were in with like the clone program and some of the weird
should we allow clones? Should we not allow clones?
Like the settling, burying the axe with Microsoft and things like that. And I mean, there were a lot of stuff that it was just like we're at a down point in our company, and we've got to figure out how to get back on that.
How to stay alive until we get something to bring us back.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, lots of people were leaving. Apple was very generous with compensation for a long time, and then it wasn't. But one interesting story about the Portable. So the Portable wasn't very successful, and of course it got really dinged for how clunky it was, right? And it was I will call this the early days of political correctness. Maybe that's not the right term. But at the beginning of the project, there was an edict came down that everyone should have a hand in deciding the design of new products, not just engineers.
Okay.
And so management went around and talked to all of the different people, and it's like, what's important to you? And manufacturing came back and said, it's really important to us that we not have to put screws in. We don't want to put screws in because it takes time to put screws in. So do away with screws. Well, when you take two half circles and screw them together, you get a really strong, lightweight thing. And when you take two half circles and snap them together, you get this. And so what do you have to do to make it strong? Well, you make it really heavy and thick. And that's what happened. The whole thing snaps together. You know how it works. You've had it apart, right?
Oh, yeah.
Everything just snaps in place, right? And the downside of that was all the plastic's really thick and really heavy. So everything gets a lot clunkier. Yeah. Another big argument in the design philosophy is, should it have a 10 key pad? Or a trackpad, or just a keyboard.
Right.
Well, who do you think was one of the biggest drivers of we need a portable Macintosh in those days?
I'm going to say that it was probably business people.
Yeah,
people
but you got to narrow it down a little more.
I'm going to say financial people.
You're just
people.
about there. Big 10 accounting.
Okay.
So the Big 10 accounting companies would send accountants to the client, and the accountants would carry a Mac with them and sit down and have their computer with all their stuff on it and they wanted a device that they could take with them more easily than lugging a Mac there to do their work at the client. And an accountant lives and dies by the 10 key pad.
Yeah.
So it has to have a 10 key pad. Well, now it's this wide.
Right.
Where it could have been this wide, but no, it's this wide.
Yeah.
And of course, lead acid batteries were kind of the only game in town, right? iCAD's not
too expensive and 5 years away.
Yeah, years away, right? And nothing else really. If you want a rechargeable battery, it's lead acid, right?
Yeah.
And then it just becomes a question of how long do you want it to last and how big is the battery? Right. That's easy, right? You tell me how long it lasts, I'll tell you how big the battery is. And we didn't have, low power disk drives or low power anything else. And we did what we could with the logic to make it as low power as possible, but there weren't low power CPUs. So that's why it was so big and clunky. So if you think the Mac Portable was big and clunky, you're right. It was.
I still, contemporary to, before the Portable came out, there were a lot of articles that would pop up in places like Macworld and industry mags and stuff were people that were writers and people that had to travel as part of their job that were like, I need a portable machine that meets these things. And at the time, there were a couple of companies, there was products. It was like the Colby or the Dynamac that were sort of like portable Macintoshes, but used desktop Mac parts, to
build
the kind of Frankenstein
computer.
Yeah.
I remember having a conversation with the project manager and saying, look, it's a Mac, it's portable. That's all it needs to be. Don't sweat the rest of it. Just don't screw it up. If it's a Mac and it's a portable, it'll sell. Yes. Right? That's it. That's what all the world needs. Maybe the answer would have been better to serve going like a 2C direction. A 2C with a screen, but no battery, plugs into the wall, easy to carry around.
Yes.
And, if you really need a battery, maybe we could make some sort of dongle thing that powered it, right?
Yep.
But maybe
there's a lot of amazing stuff. There's a great book that kind of chronicles a lot of the things from Frog Design. And absolutely, there are like modular Apple IICs. There are modular Macs with batteries, and all kinds like the Mac Jonathan and other.
Just repackaging everything.
Yeah, but it was one of those things where it's like, what do you actually need to take on the road with you?
Right.
So some of those devices were like, I just need a floppy drive, and I need a keyboard, and and so it was basically like Tinker Toy. You plug in exactly what you kind of need. Yeah. And I think that maybe part of that ended up in the portable, because there absolutely, you can look at how the design kind of evolved and what people thought people were going to need on the road, where it's like you have a keyboard, but you have a track pad, or a track ball rather.
Well, you could switch in and out, right?
Yeah, but you or you could put the keypad in. And do you want it on the left? Do you want it on the right? You can move that stuff around.
Yep, that was cool.
It has an accommodation for like dual floppy drives, although that seemingly was never an option offered to consumers. It was something that at least they thought would be a possibility. Like maybe people don't want to spend the money on a hard drive. Right. We can get some power savings on just having dual floppies, or so you can tell that it was very much like we've seen what they've done with the Colby, and we've seen what they've done with like the Dynabook and things like that. And it's very power hungry, because those machines aren't even really battery powered. Like they're like the compact portable, the compact luggable, where it is just basically tiny screen in a box. And
it's a little screen and
plug it in. It's a wall.
And screens weren't that great. I mean, the screen wasn't a high standard in those days, right? An original Mac didn't have much of a display. The LCD could certainly keep up with that.
And making an active matrix display, that was a huge expense, but that was like a very smart thing to do, because at least then with not having a backlit display on that first model, at least if you got decent lighting, or you had kind of you could still mostly read it. I cannot imagine a passive matrix display that wasn't backlit.
Well, it's interesting. The Apple IIc flat panel was not notorious for being hard to read, right? Yeah. And it was not an active matrix display. So a passive display is, all displays are driven one row at a time, right? So you load a long shift register with data and go bang on a row, and then you do it for the next row and the next row and the next row, and then eventually you come back. And depending on how many rows you have to do is how long it takes till the original one gets refreshed again. So with the active matrix, you get away from that because it's driven 100% of the time. The IIc flat panel, the technology was so bad, Sharp divided the screen into 4 quadrants because they couldn't make it visible if they drove the whole screen one at a time. So they divided it into quarters, and electrically it was 4 separate displays in one package.
Wow.
There were 4 data lines, 4 sync lines, or 8 sync lines. I forget how the sync worked, but 4 clock lines, whatever. And so the little interface box on the back of the IIc takes the one RGB stream of data and shoves it into RAM, and then pulls from the RAM 4 separate simultaneous video feeds for the 4 quadrants of the display, and feeds all 4 at the same time. Amazing. So it's doing this with one line coming in. So it's all buffered in. So if you look inside that thing, there's an ASIC and then there's a static RAM chip that stores the video. And even doing that, they couldn't make anything that was readable. That was the state of affairs in those days. I mean, they were doing what they could, but I mean, it's something you can't make 8 or 16 or whatever. 4 was bad enough.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's pretty cool. I've seen some people put color displays in those things, but then I found out, they just throw away all of my electronics and built.
Well, they don't throw them away. They pack them away carefully for future nostalgia. But there's a number of like backup cameras, like for like reverse mirror or like replacements that are LCDs, and so they're perfectly
really cheap,
sized,
right?
and they're cheap. Well, I mean, $50-$60, but still, and easily modified. So, my friend Javier, who Halfmaster, he does those modifications when people ask him to,
and it's full color too, right?
And it's full color, and it's now it's stretched out, but that's exactly what was happening previously. But
everybody always likes to complain about the fact that it's stretched out, which
I'm not. It was amazing.
So people don't understand the tech. If you understand the tech, it can't be any other way, right? Because displays have square pixels.
Yes.
CRTs don't have square pixels.
Right.
End of story, right?
Yeah. I mean, you got to paint. You got this much space. We have this part to work with. It's got to paint it like this. This is what it is. So
a CRT doesn't have pixels horizontally. So the pixels can be as wide or narrow as you choose, and vertically it's determined by the scan rate, the number of scan lines. But the display is square pixels in a fixed array. So if you map this to this, it's not going to have the same aspect ratio. It can't. And yeah, I know it looks different and it looks funny, but what else could you do?
Again, innovative product for its era. Push the boundaries.
Right.
And
right.
so that's why people are still enamored with this stuff today.
Right.
It's because of just like the engineering feats that went into making all this stuff possible. Just as you described, like how do we this display has these limitations. It has to be addressed in this manner. How do we do that with the equipment that we have? So
and, you were talking about what I like to do, and that is the sweet spot of what I love to do. I don't want to invent a new widget thing or whatever, but I want to take this thing, and this thing, put them together in a way that no one's put them together before, and make them all play together and have something really cool. That's what was interesting to me. And
well, it's interesting to us too. You, at the top of the interview, you were talking about that you were one of those kids that would like take apart a radio, you would take apart an appliance or something, you take apart a television.
Yeah.
Hopefully not like a Philco, because that could be, it's a career ender that hurts the entire time it's killing you.
Well, my dad knew enough. My dad he worked on radios and TVs, and so let's just say I did a few things when Dad wasn't around that I was lucky to be alive.
always touch it with the back of your hand.
I did some
don't
shit.
Touch it with the front of your hand.
I did some stupid shit.
But you know what though? But the people that are in the vintage computing hobby were people that grew up just like that.
Yeah,
they were people that got in trouble. But I was one of the kids that got in trouble because I would take things apart.
Yeah,
but I wanted to know how they worked. I wanted to know. I had that curious mind, and there's a lot of people that are still like that.
I feel sorry today because a kid taking something apart today gains almost nothing.
Yeah.
What do you learn? I can take this monitor apart. What am I going to see? A handful of chips and a big display.
Yeah.
I don't learn anything from that, right? In those days, I could, see the parts, understand what each one of them does. If I was lucky, I could get a schematic. Sam's photo fax.
Yes. Yeah.
There's a name from the past.
Yeah. I mean, Sam's is still a big name for people.
Well, Sam still exists, right?
Yeah.
But it's all online. Right?
Yes, right.
But in the day, if you had a TV and you needed to work on it, you bought the schematic from Sam's Photo Effects, and they would send you the schematic, and you could figure out, hopefully, what was wrong.
Yeah. Which tube failed?
I marvel at the internet's ability to make things that were challenging in my day trivial. Like, I have a part. What is it? It has a number on it. I go look it up. There's the data sheet. There was a time when engineers, one of the badges of your importance was the size of your data book library in your office. I have this many data books. I have this many data books, And, when you start off, it's like, I still have the first data book that I ever had. It's an RCA CMOS digital logic data book. It's the first one I ever got. I was working at RCA at the time, actually. But now, who has data books? They probably don't even publish them anymore.
People have PDFs these days. They're a lot lighter to carry around.
Yeah. I mean, it's all online, right? And all the schematics, you can look up the schematics and everything, the manual, everything, no matter how.
I will say the information age has definitely, I feel as a kid that kind of like grew up in the 1970s and in getting into the 1980s and all of that, it was like such an amazing time to just be like the information age, and just like how you could just reach out. Like the first time that I was shown the internet was by somebody that worked part-time at the Apple store, that he was like, oh yeah, you could check this thing out. And it was pre-web. So it was like, you can go out and here's an FTP site that had, it's got tech articles and stuff. And here's Usenet, and you can go out and talk to experts on any subject.
And was it all dial-up or?
Yeah, just dial-up internet. Well, he actually worked for a college. So they had like, a paltry kind of like late 80s, early 90s internet connection. But it was still a really amazing thing that he was like showing me Usenet and showing Archie and how you could search for things and find stuff online. And I was like, this is just it blew my mind as a kid that grew up on BBSs and stuff, where you have these little pools of expertise and these pools of knowledge.
And then they interjoined and intertwined and took off. To be able to
just go anywhere and learn anything. But you're right about like those technical guides and spec sheets and things like that. It's like, I just want to know what something is. And unfortunately, we're kind of getting like, we had that amazing thing of like curiosity and people just being so excited about this. And I think like that we're kind of getting back to that point where people are just like falling back into bad habits of like, hey, what's this? It's like anymore. I'm like, I try to encourage people, because one of my things that I do, I work as a STEM educator, and so it's like you got to be curious about these things. So this is how you find these things out for yourself. As a kid,
my son's a tech guy. He's a software guy, but he doesn't like view it the same way as I do, right? He's not quite. He comes at it from a different angle. And it's just a generational thing.
Sure. I grew up in a house where they were like, we went to the yard sale and bought these encyclopedias. By God, you're going to go look up whatever it is you want to know. And it was because they didn't know, but they didn't want to say anything. But that's fine. That's fine. I get to pick what home they go into.
Yeah.
So we will figure this out one day, Mom and Dad.
That's cool. But things have definitely changed. And Apple has obviously done incredibly well since I left. So maybe I was holding them back.
Oh, I don't know that. They've changed so much. And I would say that there is kind of that line in the sand between like the old guard and kind of like this new candy colored thing that they've created for themselves.
Right.
And I will tell you, I have a MacBook, I have an iPad, all my family here, we have iPhones, things like that, and we use CarPlay in the car. We've got a big investment in iTunes and all that. So just full disclosure. I like it that but it's more of a lifestyle product now. It feels like,
Yeah.
and computers are kind of like a secondary thing.
Right. Right.
But that old guard and kind of that mid 90s and before that, and kind of like when you get into that Johnny Ives era where it was like we made some weird shit there for a minute with like, and then it was like, okay, G3 iMac, the iMac.
Yeah.
And it was very candy colored. We're gonna get people excited about this lifestyle brand thing that we want to cultivate.
Yeah, it wasn't about the tech, it was about something else.
Yeah. It was, here's something really pretty that it gets back to that idea, because the Mac is kind of more information appliance, like in those early days where it was like, here's a very striking thing that sits on your desk that might have some HP lineage in terms of like the design, but definitely is very different than what IBM was selling at the time, what Compaq was selling at the time, like Wang and other companies had on the market in the Japanese clone manufacturers. But very striking. So they did it again. They had lightning in a bottle a second time.
Yep. When I left Apple, I went to a startup and they plopped a PC down on my desk. And in those days, all the engineering design tools that ASIC designers used ran on a Unix box. So we all had Sun boxes under our desk, but that was for, where's this sweet spot here? So that was for, doing simulations and for the design stuff. And then the PC was just for your everyday office things. And I would sit there for weeks. I sat there and yelling, going, I can't believe we lost to this. I can't believe we lost. This is garbage. I'd never used a PC before. I had no idea how to get around. I couldn't figure out how anything worked for a while. And I just like, I can't believe we lost to this.
And it's lost on price. And it's somebody, I got a tiny business and I need 10 computers.
Yeah.
I can buy 3 Macs, or I can buy 10 of these cheap Wintel boxes.
And they're probably running one thing. Mm-hmm. Today they're probably running a browser.
Yeah.
That's it. Right. Mm-hmm. Well, guess what? I'm on a PC right now running a browser.
Yeah.
It runs exactly. I played Hackintosh for a decade or so after I left.
Mm-hmm.
And I just got tired of the constant updates and everything breaking and the new, you've got to learn the new way to make it work now because everything broke. And, well, this is my machine. I don't want it to break every 3 months.
Right.
And all I'm doing is running a browser anyway. So why not? Why bother?
And my day job, I work on a lot of PC stuff. I support a lot of Apple users too, but we have a dedicated Macintosh person on campus. But we got one guy that takes care of like 800 Macintoshes, and then there's a team of like 20 people that support like 1,000, PCs a piece. It's kind of it's one of those things where it's the support costs and stuff used to be much higher on the PC stuff. It's kind of shrinking a little bit, but you're 100% right. It's anymore a lot of the experience, like everything cloud-based software. You've got like Office pretty much one with with Office 365 and all those type of things. So you're just going to a website. Teams is out there, all the rest of your stuff. You still need a real computer for things like creative endeavor.
Right.
So like you're not going to be running AutoCAD and a website in a meaningful way anytime soon. You're not going to be running Creative Cloud. You've got to have a real computer for those type of things.
The other thing from a hardware guy viewpoint is like a lot of what I understood in the older days was how to configure things to be optimal and use less memory, not waste space, not be wasteful. All that's hidden from you now, and you don't do it. but it doesn't matter because memory is free.
Right.
I mean, who cares? Disk space is free. Oh, there's 100 megabytes of garbage on my disk. I should clean up.
Yeah.
Who cares? I've got 10 terabytes.
Right.
Right.
And the same thing with RAM. RAM used to be such a premium.
Yeah.
There was no. I remember just kind of as RAM technology changes over the years and stuff. Like DDR5 is still kind of expensive. DDR4 prices came way down, and everything else has crashed. Like storage prices, things, the stuff that used to keep people up at night. But I just like the Macintosh SE30 can accommodate 128 megs of RAM.
Right.
When that machine came out, ain't nobody going to be able to afford 128 megs of RAM. It just like there's no way. It's like if you had 8 megs in there, you were already they were like, oh, Mr. Fancy Pants.
You know, even in the ASIC world, the same thing happened, right? Like the first chip I ever worked on, I think had like 500 gates. Okay, that was a big design. The last chip I worked on, say 15 years later or so, had 6 million gates. Okay. And we used to have a saying, gates are free. Gates are free. Don't waste your time optimizing something to have fewer gates. Yeah. It doesn't matter. Gates are free. Yeah. Don't be clever. Don't do things that might break or are hard to understand or whatever. Gates are free. Just be straight ahead, straightforward. It's interesting, Woz was, the Apple II design was really brilliant and super clever in a lot of regards. But modern day engineering circuit design doesn't really lend itself the same way. Everything is synchronous. Everything is done with HDL. You're writing code that builds gates. Mm-hmm. There's just very little opportunity. The only cleverness comes in the architecting. How am I going to solve this problem from the high level? And once you've done that, the implementation is just straight ahead. Just do what you can debug and make sure it works. And don't worry about how many gates it takes because gates are free.
Gates are free.
Gates are free.
That should be everybody's takeaway from tonight. Gates are free.
Gates are free.
Don't do anything clever. Just make it stable and shippable.
So the opposite of where Woz was at. It's like, oh, the Woz disk controller only had 4 chips on it. Mm-hmm. Oh, great. But, it had its limitations. But it was really clever that it could do all that in 4 chips. That's really cool.
They got it down to 1 with the integrated Woz machine.
Well, but that was an ASIC, basically.
Right, yeah.
It was an FPGA that just integrated those things and threw in a few more stuff, too. But so the whole idea is changed so much. Even in college, when I college and they were teaching us digital design, what they taught us, it was about how to be clever and how to do tricky things. And I can pull stuff out that would make you cringe. Like no one would design stuff that way anymore. Now you design for guarantee it works, meets timing. You can debug it. There are no weird cases. There's no states you can't get out of. Everything just straight ahead. Boom, boom, boom. Don't be clever. Gates are free. Again.
That's great.
Because you have so many, right? I mean, a 6 million gate chip now is small. They're 100 million gate chips. Wow. And it's all done with software anyway. You just write code.
Yeah.
You don't touch hardware anymore. You just write code. You write, HDL code, run simulations, watch the waveforms wiggle, look for mistakes, fix the code, run simulations, and do that for 6 months until it works, or at least you think it works, and then you run it off. Yeah. And now they've got FPGAs and stuff that are, so big and so fast that you can actually do the FPGA version and get 90% of the way there, like immediately. You don't have to wait for the ASIC design, fab turnaround. I used to tell my software friends, how would you like it if it cost $1 million to run the compiler and it took 6 weeks to get the answer?
It's a real deep thought situation there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's my life, right?
Yeah.
That was my life then. It cost it cost about $500,000 or so to go have the chip fabbed, and it took like 6 to 8 weeks, and then you got the answer to find out what you did wrong, right? So you're encouraged to make sure it's right the first time, which is not always possible, but at least you try.
Absolutely.
Anyway,
but Steve, you talked about some of these amazing products and projects and stuff like that you've worked on over the years, not just at Apple, but with Extreme Networks and just how your skill has kind of broken out along that. So we've got that technical side of things. Do you have any fun stories of cultural kind of fun stories about like your time at Apple or your time at
cultural times
Extreme Networks?
Well, that's a good question. I hadn't thought about any of that. I'm trying to think of something good because I can't think. Only the bad stories stick in my mind.
Oh no.
Well, I mean,
I thought that it's one of those things because I talked to a lot of folks, and they kind of the idea is that with time, even the shabby stuff gets a little shine on it as you look back on it.
I don't know. I don't want to say anything that somebody.
Well, I don't want you to.
The wrong person might be watching. I will say, I had a really good friend who was a software engineer. He joined the company a couple months before I did. I left after 17 years. Mm-hmm. He made 25 years.
Wow.
And they laid him off the next week.
Oh no.
So there's no loyalty, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think he needed the job at that point, but still. Yeah. Cool stories that happened.
Well, I mean, I don't know. Did you keep any fun things over the years? You've got a nice shirt on. did you keep your employee ID? I know that's.
I have my employee ID somewhere, and I was going to pull it out and pulled it up in front of the camera for you, and I couldn't find it. And I know exactly the container it's in, but I couldn't find the container. But yes, I do have. We used to wear our badges all the time. So there were 2 badges when I was there. The first was just like a laminated badge with your picture on it. Mm-hmm. And that one got pretty dog-eared. And then there was this hard plastic badge that was some sort of a like electronic thing, like modern day RFID. You held it up to a door and it would open the door kind of thing. Yeah. And I still have both of those. The hard plastic one held up a lot better. The other one, you wore it around clipped to your belt all day long, and it got pretty beat up over the years. But I was employee number 528, but that didn't tell the whole story because apparently something like 200 to 300 employee numbers got shipped off to some division that didn't use them.
Oh.
So it went from like 200 to 500 in one shot.
Yeah.
And so
there's a little index online where people have kind of turned in their numbers, and one of the stories with it is that Woz is employee number 1.
Yes.
And Steve in Jobs is number 2, but then was kind of took affront to that and made himself employee 0.
Yeah.
Or something along those lines.
Story, yeah. No, Woz was employee 1. That's definitely a true statement. I know that. And it's funny how that comes into play. I remember during some of the better times when the stock was doing well and people, you'd find that, we were all like 20-something guys, right? And we were all nerds, and, the dating scene at Apple wasn't especially good because it was an engineering company, right? But these young girls would come in and somebody would cue them in that people with low employee numbers had money. And it was funny. You could spot him a mile away. It's like all of a sudden the girl who wouldn't even glance in your direction wanted to strike up a conversation every time she saw you. Oh, you figured it out, did you? It's just one of those cultural things that jumped out at you when you work there. But it's not like all the people with low numbers made a lot of money, but some did. But it was crazy times.
Oh yeah.
Well, Apple seems very PC today, and sometimes I feel like I was an early victim of that. I had a boss who didn't like me for political reasons, and he made it clear that he would be happy if I left. So I did. What can I say? But yeah, good time stories. I mean, Apple used to do some really cool things. We had really odd, they would spend fortunes on Christmas party. So my wife, I don't think we were married at the time, but she worked for Apple too. And we saw Huey Lewis from the road line, like at the front of the stage.
Wow.
I mean, Apple would bring in these really expensive acts for Christmas parties and stuff like that. So they would spend a lot of money on some things like that. And it was always funny because they were company-wide parties. And so it kind of flew against the mold of, oh, well, here's the A players and we reward them, and here's the C players we don't. Oh, we're having a company-wide Christmas party. Well, it's going to be good because we got the A players there, and well, you guys are invited too. And they were pretty lavish and pretty spectacular stuff. But what other cool?
Was Apple in the habit of giving out? Would they just do a party, or did you guys occasionally get like a gift or something, kind of at year end, or when you'd complete a project or meet some sort of development goal? Or
they weren't real big. I don't remember much in the way of that. Maybe other people were getting it, but it wasn't me.
Well, I mean, I was just asking because in the pre-show you'd mentioned something about a something that they had given out that wasn't a very common thing for when they had made some sort of sales goals.
This little guy, I showed you this little guy. This is just a desk ornament that they gave out for when they made $100 million in 1 year. In engineering, it was all about T-shirts. I probably had the world's largest T-shirt collection. And, we'd have parties and stuff, but they weren't very elaborate or anything, but they weren't really big on, big bonuses or anything like that. Not anything that came my way. Maybe I just didn't deserve a big bonus, but there's always that. I thought I was going in a different direction.
Sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, that's okay.
Derail you.
That's okay. I lost my train of thought, but they would do some cool things every once in a while for people and for the group to go out, and it wasn't all misery or anything like that.
Well, that's good.
There were good times too, and the best part of it was everyone really did care about what they were building. We all tried to do the best job we can. We all tried to put ourselves in the shoes of the user, right? Would I want to use this? Could I figure it out? Could I make this work? I mean, to this day, I pick up consumer products and go like, who designed this? This is garbage, How could this possibly be, something that somebody ships and leave it like that? We always had the attitude of like, anyone could stand up and say, this is crap. We need to do this better. This is not acceptable. So there we go. So that was a really good thing. We were all on that same page. Nobody was there just to get by. Everybody wanted to do a good job. But I found a lot of companies have that attitude. It wasn't unique to Apple. Steve always told us that it was unique to Apple, that we were the only ones who cared enough. But I don't think that's really true. I think a lot of people really care about what they put out. And there may be roadblocks in their way that stop them every once in a while. And certainly not everything we did was great either. But Um, I think a lot of people care. I know we cared at extreme. We tried really hard. We put out a really good product. It just was, the market wasn't right at the time. Or it didn't, there were other considerations. There was nothing wrong with the product. There were just other considerations that made the company less than successful. But they're still around. So I guess that's not a complete failure. They found a niche.
Yeah.
But anyway, boy, that's a lot about Apple.
Yeah.
Oh, I'll tell you what was really, here's a cool thing that was really fun, because I'm wearing a shirt, right? This was from Macworld Boston. Every once in a while, I would just sign up to go work a Macworld. And when you spend your whole life sitting at a desk in front of a computer, grinding away at stuff, and then you go stand in front of the public in the booth with 10,000 raving fans who think you're God, it's a very different experience than your daily life, I mean, I would have somebody walk up to the booth and ask me a question about whatever product I was showing, and I'd start talking, and they'd ask a tech question, and of course I could answer it. So then they'd ask more and more, and it was kind of a one-on-one interaction, right? And then I'd glance up, and there would be 50 people listening to what you're saying, and you're like, oh wow, I guess some people really want to know about this stuff, right? I mean, it was a big deal, and it was just kind of getting out of the daily humdrum by doing a trade show like that.
Oh yeah,
is kind of cool.
Did you ever attend a Mac Hack or anything like that? That was kind of a higher ed, like a way for Apple, because Apple, not the first few years, but eventually would send people there to kind of interact, to talk about product changes and things like that.
Oh, did they? No, I never went to any of those. I went to a couple Macworlds, but that's about all I ever did. I never went to the, because I was pretty hardware focused. So, and of course, every Macworld, there's some new desktop product just introduced, about to be introduced, whatever. And I was probably associated with it in some way or another. So here, go stand in the booth and answer questions. But if I don't know the answer, I'll make it up. Oh yeah, they just want to talk to you.
Subject to change. Subject to change.
Yeah. Okay, there you go. And sometimes you get the guy who wants to prove he knows more about the tech than you do. And that's cool, because you probably do. You may know more about this computer than I do, because I just designed this one little corner over here. So I don't know everything about everything on it. I don't try to. I don't need to. And so, they want to show off. That's fine. Go ahead. Tell me how much you know. You can come up here if you want.
Right.
But it's mostly fun. It's mostly really fun because you've spent a lot of money on advertising and PR and selling a story, and a lot of people have bought in, and they're very excited about it, and that's infectious, right? And sometimes working there, you don't see that, right? You don't interface with all these people who are so excited about what you're doing. So that was a cool thing. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, it's kind of nice to go out and I oftentimes say like feedback is a gift. So people that want to talk to you, and even people that want to just come and tell you you're doing a bad job, they cared enough to come and say, "Hey, this is awful." Well, thanks. How do I make it better? It's how do we have a conversation now? I understand you're frustrated or whatever, but how do we have a conversation about like addressing whatever this thing is that you think is bad? And
I always start with so there may be some things you don't know, which is why we did what we did. Let me explain those to you, and then we'll talk about how we really screwed it up.
Right.
Because some things are out of your control, right? And you can't do everything exactly how you want.
Yeah, there's pressures, there's parts, and there's logistics and sales and
a million other things that it's really easy to second guess that it should have been this way. But if you want my job, there's plenty of opportunity. Go get a degree or two. Come on down.
Finish up your masters and come back.
Finish up your masters and come back. Oh, that was another cool thing I got to do quite often was I did a lot of college recruiting.
Mm-hmm.
And that was pretty fun. And I always took people by surprise because people wanted to come in and tell me how they got straight A's in all these courses. And I always just sat there and go, I don't care. Tell me something you did that was cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
because real engineers do cool things, but it's their nature.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes people that just got straight A's in all the courses turn out not to be real engineers. Right. Sorry.
Or they might have like the fundamentals, but they don't have the passion.
Yeah.
And those days, it seems like passion was as important as like the fundamental skills because you had to want to do things.
I don't like the passion word so much. It's almost like they don't have the gene. And the gene gives you the passion, but it also gives you the curiosity,
yes,
and the stick-to-itiveness, and the drive to get to the bottom and to figure it out.
Yeah.
And you can be a straight A type person and not have those things. And just doing the books doesn't always get you there. So I just ask these kids, and it's so hard to find because most people go to college and all they do is take courses. And what do you got to talk about? Well, I took courses. Okay, great. Did you do well in your courses? Yeah. Did you like your courses? Yeah. Okay, fine. That's cool. Next. Oh, tell me something cool you did.
What clubs are you in? What what projects have you worked on? Like, right. I want to hear about like your passions. Or I said it again, but I want to know what excites you. I want to know what excites you.
Right. I mean, passion's not a bad word for it. I just think the right word is more encompassing, because you can be passionate about something and not be good at it.
Sure.
I mean, presumably, if you're passionate enough, you'll get better. But so it's. It was fun talking to kids. And so the problem was every time I find somebody that really checked those boxes, he'd have 10 offers. We could never bring those people on because Apple wasn't paying that well and wasn't doing that well in the time I was doing those things. And, somebody else was paying more and offering more and more exciting or whatever. So,
you should have told them. You should have said, hey, listen, we don't have a lot of upfront pay. However, we will give you stock, which right now is just fancy toilet paper. But in 10 years, in 10 years, well, you're going to be financing your great grandkids' college with this.
It's really funny. I always used to say I was the person that spent the most time at Apple and made the least out of it, because I left when things were still down in the dumps. And to correct your statement, in 10 years, well, at least in those days, stock options only ran for like 7 years. So you vested over 3 or 4 years, and then you had like 3 or 4 more years to exercise them. And then if you didn't, they went away. So if the company didn't do something to go up in that window, you didn't make anything unless you were willing to put your own money in and wait, which you could have done along the way anytime. But no, people did really, really well. I would have, if I could have held on to all the options I had for 20 more years, I would have done way better staying at Apple. But hey, that's water under the bridge. But I know people that go to Google and places like that still get stock options that still become worth significant money. I don't know what kind of deals they offer anymore, but it's the big company. It's hard for a big company to give you stock option that's going to really be worth something. They just don't need to, right? They can just hire you on salary alone. You don't have to go there. So, yeah, it would have been a lot easier later on, but it was definitely a challenge. But it was fun going to college and talking to people.
Yeah, absolutely. I work in higher ed. That's my
Yeah.
day job. It doesn't pay anything either. So don't feel too bad. The
Right.
church mice next door, they're doing great. So,
Cool.
but
Cool.
no, I don't think anybody there's some things you do and it's just because you love it and because you feel that it's important. And so I absolutely appreciate all of the cool things you made contributions to over the years, because it's what kept my interest in the hobby going, and made a lot of neat equipment.
It's cool that people are still playing with this stuff and can keep it alive in spite of all the electrolytic capacitors going bad. Who knew?
Yeah.
You know, but
brittle plastics, bad caps. It's times against us. There's only so many. You think about those, like the Mac Plus and machines like that. Those flyback transformers. They've only got so many power on cycles left.
Yeah,
so
those are easily replaced. And
okay,
maybe not.
Well, I just mean like new old stock parts on that stuff. We're getting to the end on a lot.
They're not really building flyback transformers anymore, are they?
No, yeah. Kind of rough, but it is nice. That is something that the people that grew up in the collecting hobby and are now adults that have, they've got engineering degrees. They've got, or they're self-taught people that absolutely have they want to see this stuff continue. They want to see this stuff stay on the road as long as possible. I'm one of those people.
And so much of this stuff can be self-taught, right? You don't have to have an engineering degree to go a long way in this stuff. I mean, obviously helps, but it's not a requirement. I'm always curious as to, is the end just to get it to work? I mean, are these things useful at all? I guess there's old software you can run.
Oh yeah, there's tons of old games and productivity software and things, and it's one of those. It's a challenge. It's like when people are like, yeah, well, what do you do with it now you got it fixed? It's like, oh, I don't know. Why don't you ask anybody that collects antique cars? Why don't you ask anybody that rebuilds a covered bridge? Why don't you ask anybody that does anything? Because at the very, very core of all of this, it's a conservation hobby. Because people they want to see this stuff continue. They had a love of this stuff when they were young, or they like, my dad loved he loved these old machines and I want to keep them going, or they just want young people to know where we came from. To keep people curious. Right. Because just like you said, you can crack open a modern LCD monitor. What's there to see inside? It's a bunch of large scale integration and a LCD matrix. That's it. Power supply. Yeah. There's not a whole lot to learn. There's not a whole lot to know, unless you want to start looking at like data sheets and things like that and figure out how those things work. But you can show somebody the guts of a Mac Plus, where you have a television, right? A set built in. You've got an analog side, you've got a digital side, and how the marriage of those things.
And the computer architecture is very primitive. That's not beyond the comprehension of anybody who's got some level of understanding of how these things work.
But you see where we began, where things started, and then where they scaled up from there. That it's, and
everything we do always looks complicated at the most recent level at face value. But when you look back, it's just one step after the other, just adding and adding more and adding more and adding more. It's not like everything changed overnight to super crazy complicated that only 20 people in the world can understand. Right. It just evolves a little at a time. The old, dirty little secret, we played a lot of games in engineering. I had the divot in the thumb from the Apple II controller.
Right, yeah.
There was, because we had all the games, everything was in the lab, right? All this stuff was kicking around. Who knows where they came from? I doubt anybody ever paid for any of it in the early days. But
I'm sure there's lots of people that just were like, it was one of those things where it was like, just to know that it's like, hey, people inside Apple are playing Apple Cider Spider and like playing my Donkey Kong clone.
Exactly.
And,
yeah, it's cool. And you want us to do that, right? Because we'll help debug things.
Yes.
So there was a lot of that going on, at least in the early days. Probably not anymore, but in the early days, there's definitely some of that. Absolutely. I still loved Gato. Gato was my favorite, and I can't find that anywhere.
Oh, I think it's actually part of there's a collection, and that's another thing because you were talking about floppy, well, with the floppy drives and everything like that.
Yeah.
What folks have done, there's a group that put together a kind of a compilation where it's like everything is on like a single smart port volume. And it's hundreds of Apple II games. It's called Total Replay,
and run a PC emulator for it.
You can, or it'll run on real hardware.
Oh, run on real hardware.
Yeah. So if you have a 2C or you've got like a 2E with like a Lyron, like the later floppy controller, or a 2GS, or or the Apple IIe card for the Macintosh.
Right.
If you've got any of those later things that have smart port support built in, I can just launch that image, and there's tons of stuff. But I'm fairly certain that that's part of that collection.
Yeah. Okay. I'll check it out. Yeah. I think I found it one time, but I was trying to run it on an emulator, and it just didn't work very well for some reason. You know how those things, emulators are a challenge, right? Because you can never cover every possibility.
That's why real hardware wins every time. It's there's no shame in emulation, or like nowadays with like the Mr. FPGA setup, that we're getting to a point where FPGAs and things like that or we're getting so close to simulation.
Yes.
Where that experience is almost indistinguishable, and we will get there.
The FPGA world has gone crazy, and to the desktop I could do it right here, right? I could get all the software and design ASICs in FPGAs right here with hardly any investment.
Yeah.
Which is just crazy radical compared to my world back then.
EDA tools, things, there's like KiCad or KiCad, depending on who you talk to, and 3D modeling tools. And a lot of that stuff has really been democratized just in the last like 10 years.
My world was Verilog Synopsys, and they still exist. That's what people that's 25 years ago. I was doing Verilog Synopsys, and that's still what people do. I'm sure it's evolved quite a bit, but it's still basically the same thing.
Yeah, and gates are free, but that software is still going to cost you.
Oh yeah, those guys do very well.
That's why they're still around.
And it's not just the license; it's the yearly.
Software as a service. Yep, absolutely.
Service pack. Yeah. So, that's why they're still around. At least the winners. The ones the people that won that battle, that war's over, and the winners are still doing really well. Yeah. So it's cool.
Yeah, Steve, thank you so much for. We're getting to that 2-hour point. I didn't want to monopolize your whole evening, but
that's okay.
But some amazing stories. But some amazing stories about like your career and
well, good luck with your internet venture here. Get those clicks up.
Yeah. I don't know. It's one of those things where I think more than anything else, it's my YouTube channel is going to be 20 years old next year. And if I was going to make it, I'd have made it by now. But what I'm very pleased with is that I make videos. I'm not beholden to anybody. I don't have any sponsors. I just make the videos that I want to watch. And it's one of those things where there's a great guy. His name's Joel Hodgson, and what he's always said is the right people will get it. And I'm very, very lucky that that the right people understand the type of content that I make, and I'm very, very fortunate that folks like yourself are willing to take a little bit of time out of their schedule to talk about all this old stuff.
No, it was fun. So, trip down memory lane.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Have a great evening.
You too.